Start.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, so today's program will be recorded. Before we can officially begin, let me read the following disclaimer. The Harvard Club of Southern California owns all the rights to the event by participating in or attending this event virtually. You consent to that recording and distribution. You also grant to the Harvard Club of Southern California permission to use your name, likeness, image, and voice in any and all manner and media and for any purpose without compensation. Thank you. So, hello everyone. Nice to see so many familiar faces and some new ones as well. Welcome to the Myron Kayton Science Pub number 22. A unifying theory for lifestyle medicine. This will be an extraordinary presentation. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome, Dr. Ornish, to the Harvard Club of Southern California. We're very honored to have you share your expertise with us. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I am so eager to listen to what you have to say about living healthy and longer lives. My name is Ethel Lachko, and I'm a board director of the Harvard Club of Southern California and founder of the Science series. And together with Germán Enciso, our moderator, professor of mathematics at UCI and board director of the Club of Southern California, we coordinate the Science Pub series. We would also like to thank our faithful partners who help us make this possible. The MIT Club of Southern California, thanks John and Jennifer, and Courtney from Columbia University. Germán, would you like to say something about the format we will be following today?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. The format that we usually follow for the Science Pubs is that the speaker gives a presentation, and generally we have questions posted on the chat window. So feel free to post any questions you have, and in the end we'll just go through the questions, especially the ones that are on topic that are related to the presentation, and we'll ask them to the speaker. We're going to have about 10 minutes of questions and get feedback from the speaker.
Thank you, Germán. So before we get started with today's presentation, please mark your calendars for another extraordinary music concert that we are organizing in January with the Colburn School. The program is called Recovered Voices, music of Shostakovich and Weinberg, a concert by composers whose careers and lives were disrupted or worse during the Nazi regime in Europe. If you would like to attend in person, you need to register with the Colburn School as soon as possible. And if you like our programs, please become a member of the Harvard Club of Southern California. For this very special event, Germán and I have asked our friend, Dr. Don McHugh, former board director of the club, a graduate of MIT in lifestyle medicine, and a super fan of Dr. Ornish's work. He is to introduce Dr. Ornish to us and his work. Thanks, John, and take it away from here.
Thanks so much, Ethel and Germán. I want to say first and foremost, I'm so impressed with the work you've done. Science Pubs are a fantastic way to bring us together and talk about science. I've been honored to be a speaker, but I'm just as thrilled to be a listener and learn about all these topics. Dr. Ornish got his BA in Humanities from UT Austin, where he gave the baccalaureate address. After medical school at Baylor, he trained in internal medicine at Harvard's Mass General Hospital, where he soon learned that California was a much better place than Boston. His early research on the impact of lifestyle change to prevent and even reverse our #1 killer, sclerosis, really created a sensation. But what impressed me deeply was that he reached out to all of us. And his Ornish diet has been rated #1 for heart health since 2011 by US News and World Report. He also has his intensive cardiac rehabilitation program approved by Medicare. It took him 16 years to get that approved, but we can all benefit from that now. His research with the Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, changed our understanding of the way genes and lifestyle interact with each other and may one day help us prevent or even reverse aging. Dr. Ornish was appointed by Presidents Clinton and Obama to the White House Commission on Health. His advice has been sought by Prince Charles, Tony Robbins, and Oprah Winfrey, and Life magazine named him one of the 50 most influential members of his generation. What I want to finish with is what I consider the most important award. I'm one of 8,000 physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals that are hoping to turn healthcare into a movement for wellness. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine's first Lifetime Achievement Award was given to Dr. Ornish. When I came to Harvard Medical School, I was looking for a path to focus on wellness rather than illness, and I think Dr. Ornish has given us that pathway. So we, thousands of physicians and nurses, can hopefully change the system and create a path forward for all of us to engage in health and wellness. Dr. Ornish, you changed the world, and we are very grateful to learn from you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, John, for your kind introduction, and Ethel for arranging this, and Herman as well, and everyone else who's been involved in this. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be of service in such a meaningful way. To me, awareness is always the first step in healing, and this is a good way of doing that. So with your permission, I'm going to go through 45 years of work in about 45 minutes, and then that'll allow some time for questions and discussion. Let me just share my screen here.
Dr. Ornish, just a moment. You mentioned that you wanted us to read a little bit from your bio. Do you still want me to do that, or do you?
No, I think this is good. I think John covered it all pretty well.
Sounds good.
But thank you. So as we talked about, I'm going to talk about what I call a unified theory of lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine, as John indicated, is a field that I help create, which is using lifestyle changes not only to help prevent disease, which we all know, but to treat it and often even reverse it. And over the last 45 years, we've been able to, I think our unique contribution has been able to use these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. The intervention has been the same for all of these different things we'll be talking about today. It's got four main components. It's a whole foods, plant-based diet that's naturally low in fat and sugar, various meditation and yoga-based stress management techniques, moderate exercise, and what we call psychosocial support, which is support groups. One of my favorite quotes, which is the first quote in the Undo It book, is attributed to Einstein. It says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So to reduce all this to its essence is to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. And that's it. And the more diseases we study, the more scientific evidence we have to show what a powerful difference these changes can make. And, that's the biggest obstacle that I often find is people think, oh, diet and lifestyle, that's kind of boring. How powerful could that be? It's got to be a new drug, a new laser, a new device, something really high-tech and expensive to be powerful. And as John mentioned, U.S. News, they rate medical schools and universities and hospitals, and they also rate diets every year. And for the last 11 years, since 2011, they've rated what they call the Ornish diet as #1 for heart health, a panel of experts there. And over time, we've shown that these same lifestyle changes can reverse a wide variety of the most common and costly chronic diseases. We were the first to show that heart disease could be reversed and early stage prostate cancer, as well as a lot of these other conditions. And I'll go through these in a little bit of detail. And the question is, when I was trained at Mass General, we were taught different diseases, different diagnoses, and different treatments. And yet, why is it that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different diseases? And the reason is because they're really not so different. They all share the same underlying biological mechanisms. And the Undo It book that I co-authored with my wife, Ann, and we've been working together now for 27 years, I guess, puts forth this, that's Ann, puts forth this new unifying theory, which is that the reason why these same lifestyle changes can reverse so many different chronic diseases is that they share the same underlying biological mechanisms. And they include things like chronic inflammation, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells that we have living in our gut, oxidative stress, apoptosis, angiogenesis, gene expression, telomeres, immune function, and so on. And each one of these mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And so that really is what ties it all together. And it helps explain why, for example, you'll often see the same patient has what are called comorbidities. They'll often have heart disease and type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure, high cholesterol, being overweight, and so on. Because again, they're just different manifestations of the same underlying issue. Or Walter Willett and his group at the Harvard Nurses study and the Harvard Health Professionals study looked at over 100,000 nurses and doctors. And again, they found that those same beneficial lifestyle changes had an across-the-board benefit, an 82% lower risk of dying from heart disease, a 65% lower risk from cancer, a 74% lower risk from all causes. Again, because they're all just different manifestations of the same condition. It also even affects COVID-19. There are two studies that I found were particularly interested as we're learning more that, even if you're triple and quadruple and quintuple vaccinated, it doesn't necessarily keep you from getting COVID. It just reduces the symptom severity. One study, so people are looking for what can I do to help enhance my immune system? And one study that was done at Harvard and at King's College in London, over 600, almost 600,000 people, those eating a predominantly plant-based diet had a 9% lower risk of getting sick in the first place with COVID, but a 41% lower risk of severe COVID. And in a different study that was done in 8 countries, including the US, where they looked at frontline healthcare workers who were taking care of COVID patients every day, so they were exposed to COVID every day, those eating a plant-based diet were 73% less likely to develop moderate to severe COVID. Those eating a pescatarian diet with some fish were 59% less likely. But those eating a high animal protein, low carb, Atkins keto kind of diet were 400% more likely to develop moderate to severe illness. Now, the overarching ethos of all of my work is I had this cartoon drawn when I was an intern that we spend so much time mopping up the floor without also turning off the faucet. Now, mopping up the floor sometimes we need to do. Drugs and surgery properly used can be life-saving, especially in a crisis. We've all benefited from that, but they don't really treat the cause. And one of the reasons I got interested in doing this work, I went to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, where it has kind of a pioneering ethos. I got to do things as a medical student I couldn't do as a senior resident when I was at Harvard and Mass General. But I was learning how to do bypass surgery in my core clinical surgery rotation with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon who was one of the people who invented bypass surgery. And Dr. DeBakey was really old school. He was the kind of person who would stick you with the needle and draw blood if you didn't move your fingers fast enough out of the operating field. And I remember when I first got there, he said, "What year are you, son?" I said, "I'm starting my 3rd year." He goes, "Damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with all these weird ideas you have." So I didn't hear from him for decades. And he called me a few years ago out of the blue, and I recognized his voice. He had a very distinctive Louisiana accent. He said, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey." And I said, "To what do I owe this honor?" He goes, "Well, those weird ideas I used to give you such a hard time about when you were my medical student?" I said, "Oh yeah, I remember them really well." He goes, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He says, "I'm 99 years old. I'll be dying soon. And I just thought you'd like to know my wife got interested in your work and it's really helped me." So anyway, the point is, if you stick around long enough, things sometimes come around. It may just take longer than we think. Anyway, what would happen then at the time is we do bypasses on patients. He'd tell them they were cured. And more often than not, they'd go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. They eat junk food, smoke cigarettes, not manage stress, not exercise. And more often than not, the new bypasses would clog up and we'd cut them open again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. So for me, bypass surgery became a metaphor that we were literally bypassing the problem without also treating the cause. And I would wonder, what would happen if we turned off the faucet? And the faucet, the underlying cause, to a much larger degree than we had once realized, are the lifestyle choices that we make each day. And what we found in all these studies, which I'll share with you now, is that our bodies often have a remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized, when we can treat the cause. And everything I'm going to share with you now, all the studies we've done, were thought to be impossible at the time, which is, to me, what makes it fun. If you can redefine something that's possible that people thought was impossible, by publishing it in the leading peer-reviewed journals and working with the leading collaborators, it can give, at this point, millions of people new hope and new choices that we didn't have before. And again, awareness is the first step in healing. So that's why I spend so much of my time doing research, and that's what gets me out of bed every day, because we can really empower millions of people. So I started doing this work, as I mentioned. I took a year off between my 2nd and 3rd years of medical school at Baylor. And one of the great things about Baylor is that, they have this pioneering ethos. You got a weird idea, go for it. It may not work, but you'll learn something. We'll support it. So I took 10 men and women, put them in a hotel for a month. The chief of medicine donated the tests, and the chief of cardiology referred patients. That never would have happened at Harvard, by the way. It's so much more hierarchical there, which we can talk about later. We use and then a new test called thallium, which is a radioisotope, and it goes where the blood glows. So you can see if there's any part of the blood that's not getting any blood. So this is the heart here. This area around 10 o'clock that's dark is a part of the heart not getting enough blood flow due to heart disease. And a month later, it was normal. And 8 of the 10 patients showed improvement in their blood flow, which had never been shown before. But it was also my first experience that when you're doing something that doesn't fit within the conventional paradigm, it's not always well accepted. It's like, well, how do you know they wouldn't have gotten better anyway? You didn't have a randomized control group for comparison. I said, well, strictly speaking, that's true. But have you ever had any of your patients get better like this? Well, that's beside the point. So went back to school, finished medical school, and then did a second study. This time we did have a randomized control group for comparison, and the experimental group got better. The control group got worse. The differences were highly significant, and we published that in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And in both studies, there was a 91% reduction in the frequency of chest pain, and that's part of the reason why these kinds of lifestyle changes are sustainable, because most people feel so much better so quickly. It redefines the reason for change from fear of dying, which is not sustainable, to joy of living, which is. And I'll talk more about that later. And just as a digression, since this is the Harvard Club, I had heard the chief of medicine at Baylor at the time, Antonio Gatto, had trained at MGH, and he said that Dr. Alexander Leaf, who was the chief of medicine at Harvard and the chief of the medical service at the Mass General, was interested in these kinds of things. So I called him up and said, hey, would you like to come see what we're doing? You know, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And he came down and saw what we were doing. And he said, how would you like to give medical grand rounds at Mass General? I said, sure. And then Dr. Gatto, when he found out, he said, no, you can't do that. You'll embarrass me. No medical students ever given grand rounds there. I said, well, I'll be the first. He said, no, you'll embarrass me. I don't want you to go. I said, how about let me give grand rounds at Baylor? And if you do well, if I do well, you give me your blessing. If not, I won't go. So I did, and he did. And I went there, and Dr. Leaf ultimately became my mentor there. And he said he was just he was like the guy in the John Houseman character in The Paper Chase, if you ever saw that about Harvard Law School. Very crusty, old, very, kind of intimidating guy. But he said he was just so tickled that this lowly medical student had the nerve to call up the chief of medicine and invite him to come, that he did, so, and sometimes ignorance can be bliss for me. Anyway, so for the lifestyle heart trial, we took men and women who had heart disease, randomly divided them into 2 groups. One group got this program, one group didn't. And we used quantitative arteriography to measure the amount of stenosis or blockage, cardiac PET scans to measure blood flow, and cardiac events. And these were all blindly assessed by independent observers. And every person had at least one blockage that was 75% blocked or greater. But when we looked at all the blockages, they got worse after 1 year and even worse after 5 years. That used to be called the natural history of heart disease, was to get worse and worse. But instead, we found that when people made bigger changes and several things at the same time, they showed some reversal of heart disease after 1 year, which we published in the Lancet, the leading international peer-reviewed medical journal. And even when we got NIH support to extend the study from 1 year to 5 years. It's very hard to get funding to do studies that people think are impossible, because it's a bit of a catch-22. Without the funding, you can't show it works, and if they don't think it's going to work, they don't want to fund it. So we generally go to private individuals and philanthropy to get started. And then in this case, the NIH gave us a grant to extend it for 4 more years. And we found even more reversal after 5 years than after 1 year, which we published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. When we did the PET scan to measure blood flow, there was a 400% improvement in blood flow after 5 years compared to the control group, which got worse. And this is a representative patient. You can see the narrowing here in one of the coronary arteries, because it's partially clogged, was less clogged a year later. So the radius is a little bit bigger. And because the blood flow is a 4th power function of the radius, even a modest increase in the radius from less blockage causes an exponential improvement in blood flow. So you can see here, blue and black is no blood flow at the beginning. A year later, orange and white is maximal blood flow. And it wasn't just a few patients that skewed the mean. 99% of these patients stopped to reverse their heart disease as measured by PET scans, but only 5% of the control group patients got better. And one of the interesting findings, I had predicted incorrectly, as it turned out, that the younger people who had less severe disease would show more improvement, but I was wrong. It turned out the amount of improvement wasn't how old or how sick you were. It was simply a function of the more they changed, the more they improved at any age. And when you think about it, that's a very empowering message to give people. And there were 2.5 times more heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, angioplasties, and stents in the randomized control group than in the group that made these lifestyle changes after 5 years. Now, to put a human face on this, this is a man I'm about to show you, it's 1.5 minutes long, who's a doctor himself talking about his improvements on this program.
So the situation I'm describing here is of an internal medicine doctor who started a new chapter in his life with his wife, moving to Lake Arrowhead, having just opened.
Oops, sorry, wrong button. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can go backwards. All right, let's try that again. My mistake.
So the situation I'm describing is an internal medicine doctor who started a new chapter in his life with his wife, moving to Lake Arrowhead, having just opened a private practice office after all of our kids went to college and we could relocate. And just as this was ramping up, we had a horrible car accident which precipitated a heart attack that dropped my cardiac functioning down to basically 11 to 13 or 14, 15% of what it should have been, which resulted in intractable chest pain, angina, trouble breathing, inability to walk from room to room, go upstairs without being carried. I was offered a heart transplant as the only way to stay alive. And at the 11th hour, I entered the Ornish program, which provided me with an entire paradigm shift with respect to stress management, exercise, diet, nutrition. And despite not believing it myself and
Dean Ornish.
either, it worked beyond my wildest dreams. I'm now able to exercise moderately. I can work full time. I can live at 6,000 feet, and our quality of life is actually better than it was before.
That's why I love doing this kind of work. It really makes a difference in people's lives. Former President Bill Clinton has talked publicly about being on this program, and he made this minute-long video as a tribute. I'm just going to share it with you just to talk. He can talk about whatever your politics. I think when a former president, especially known for not eating particularly healthily, makes these changes, I think that really sets a great example for everyone.
Dean, congratulations on receiving the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine. And to celebrate this very well-deserved honor, I want to thank you for more than 25 years of friendship to Hillary and me, and for the difference you've made in so very many people's lives, including mine. You've not only changed the way the world thinks about personalized healthcare, you also are one of the kindest, most considerate people I've ever met. So I'm just one of the thousands of those who are happier and healthier, thanks to your guidance and the power of your example. And I'm grateful every day for the priceless gift you've helped to give me and our family. The ability to keep spending time with each other and to keep doing work we love. Thanks, friend. Congratulations again. I hope you have a great celebration.
So then we looked at prostate cancer to see whether that could be reversed. And we did this in collaboration with the chair of urology at UCSF, Peter Carroll, who's still the chair, and the then chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Bill Fair. And we took men who had biopsy-proven prostate cancer, who had elected for reasons unrelated to the study to do what's called watchful waiting or now active surveillance. So then we could then randomize them and have a non-intervention control group, which you can't usually do because most people who have cancer get treatment right away. So this would allow us to look at the effects of lifestyle changes alone. We found the PSA levels, a marker for prostate cancer, went up or got worse in the control group, went down in the experimental group. The differences were highly significant. And once again, they occurred in direct proportion to the degree of lifestyle change. The more people change their lifestyle, the lower their PSA went. But PSA is not a perfect marker for prostate cancer. So we added some of their serum to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing at UCLA at Bill Aronson's lab, and found that the tumor growth was inhibited 70% versus only 9% in the control group, also in direct proportion to the degree of lifestyle change, which is pretty amazing when you think about that. And none of the experimental group patients in the first year needed surgery or radiation or chemo, but 6 of the control group patients did. And this patient, for example, showed tumor activity shrinking as well as the PSA coming down. And so taken as a whole, this was the first and still the only randomized trial showing that lifestyle changes may slow, stop, and often even reverse the progression of men who have early stage prostate cancer. Now, there are some people who have a very aggressive form of prostate cancer, about 10% or so. And for them, surgery immediately and radiation may be the best choices. But for the 90% of people who are lower risk, who have Gleason scores of 6 and under, you need to talk to your doctor about this. this may be an option for them. Or if you do need surgery, this can help to prevent recurrence. Now, and again, at the Harvard Physicians Health Study, men who ate mostly a Western diet had a 250% higher risk of prostate cancer-related death and a 67% risk of premature death from any cause. Whereas those that ate a mostly whole foods plant-based diet, not only did it not go up, it actually went down by 36%. And that's the pattern that we see in all these studies, is that when you go from a typical American diet to a whole foods plant-based diet, you're really getting a double benefit. You're not only not increasing it, but you're actually decreasing the risk of not only prostate cancer, but colon cancer, breast cancer, a wide variety of chronic diseases. We then did a study with Craig Venter, who, as you probably know, was the first to decode the human genome, and found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months when people went on this lifestyle medicine program, and particularly down regulating the oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer. And this is a heat map. These are all genes that cause cancer. Red is turned on. 3 months later, green is turned off. Now, when I was in medical school, it wasn't that long ago, we were taught that, the only way you could change your genes is to change your parents, which of course you can't do. But we now know that your genes are not your fate in most cases, that there are switches that turn these genes off and on. They're called either histone or non-histone proteins, methylation, sirtuins, and so on. And so if you can turn off a gene that causes prostate cancer or turn off a gene that causes inflammation, it's as though you're actually changing the gene itself. And that's what happened in another study. We found that, I mentioned earlier, on this unifying theory that all these different biological mechanisms, when you change your lifestyle, it downregulates the genes that cause the chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, angiogenesis, atherosclerosis, and so on, that underlie as biological mechanisms so many of these diseases that we've been talking about. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. And even if your mother and father and sister and brother and aunts and uncles all died of heart disease, for example, it doesn't mean you're going to die. It just means you probably need to make bigger changes than someone else. But if you're willing to, there's a good chance you can prevent it from ever happening. And meditation alone can change gene expression. This is from Jeff Dussek's work at Harvard, where they found that control group, 8 weeks of meditation, long-term meditation, you can see it goes from red to kind of red to green and vice versa, that the more you meditate, it actually changed over 300 genes, gene expression in beneficial ways. And then, as John mentioned, we did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres. And telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging. They're sometimes likened to the plastic tip on an end of a shoelace that keeps the shoelace from unraveling. They keep our DNA from unraveling. And over time, as DNA replicates, the telomeres tend to get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from all these different chronic diseases goes up proportionate to that. And she had shown with Alyssa Epple and others that people who had unhealthy lifestyle choices, those that were under chronic stress or who smoked cigarettes, who were sedentary, their telomeres got shorter faster. And I said, we had lunch one day, and I said, if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. And sure enough, we found that the telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, increased by 30% in just 3 months. And over a 5-year period, we found for the first time that anything could actually lengthen telomeres, whereas they got shorter in the control group. And when we published this, the Lancet editors sent out this press release worldwide, calling it the first study ever showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging at a cellular level. Now, if this was a new drug, if drug X could do this, it'd be a multi-billion-dollar drug. But it's, again, it's these same lifestyle changes that we keep coming back to. And once again, the more people change their lifestyle, the longer their telomeres got at any age. We're now in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see if we can reverse early stage Alzheimer's disease. And if we could show that, and it's still a big if, but if we could show that, it'll be the most important work yet, because there are no drugs that can even stop it from getting worse. Pardon me, there have only been 2 drugs that have been approved in the last 20 years. One was aducanumab last year, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were over 40 years ago when I started doing work with heart disease. Back then, as I mentioned, it was thought that once you had heart disease, the best you could do would be to slow down the rate at which you got worse. We found, if you make bigger changes in a lot of things, you could actually reverse it, as we've talked about. And we know what's good for your heart is good for your brain. They share a lot of the same underlying biological mechanisms. So my hypothesis is maybe if we know that the finger study and the mind studies show that the rate of progression into dementia can be slowed when people make more moderate changes. Maybe bigger ones could stop or reverse it. Ounce of prevention, pound of cure. And the only two drugs that have been approved, one aducanumab was approved a couple of years ago. It probably should never have been approved. It slowed the rate of worsening of Alzheimer's in one study a little. The other showed it did nothing. A third of the patients got little side effects like, bleeding into your brain. They were charging $56,000 per dose, which if Medicare covered it, would pretty much spend more money on just that than pretty much everything else in Medicare combined. And there was another drug that approved just about 3 weeks ago, a cousin of this, and again, only slowed the rate at which people got worse. This time only 20% had bleeding into their brain and so on. But what it does is it shows you how desperate people are for a sense of hope. So stay tuned. We're still trying to raise the last part of the funding we need to finish the study. We have about a year to go. So if you or anyone else that has been touched by Alzheimer's would find it meaningful, in private, I can go through some of the interim findings that we're finding, which I'm happy to do. And effects, what's good for you is good for the planet. What's personally sustainable is globally sustainable. And, this pandemic isn't just COVID, it's heart disease and diabetes and so on. And the irony is that they're starting to eat like us and live like us and die like us. And so, more people are dying today from chronic diseases like heart disease and type 2 diabetes than AIDS and TB and malaria combined. And it's diverting a lot of resources away from things that really do require drugs like AIDS, TB, and malaria to things that can be largely prevented and often even reversed by changing diet and lifestyle. And it's so easy to say, like, what can I do as one person about these three major issues that are threatening our planet: the hunger crisis, the global warming crisis, and the health crisis. And they all intersect around what we put in our mouths every day. From a hunger, again, what's good for you is good for the planet. It takes 14 times more resources to make a pound of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. If there's enough food to feed everybody. I went on the board of directors of the San Francisco Food Bank years ago when I learned that 1 out of 5 children in the Bay Area goes to bed hungry. And I was at this White House conference on nutrition and hunger last month, and 1 out of 8 Americans goes to bed hungry and has food insecurity. We can do better than that. And if enough people ate a plant-based diet, there's enough food to feed everybody. And you don't have to be a vegan. If you just had a meatless Monday, whatever you do, if people realize, oh, I can actually make a difference and free up resources to make food available to the hungry, that makes it meaningful and sustainable. From a global warming crisis, it turns out that more global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. It's why Al Gore became a vegan, even though he's a cattle rancher. And from a health crisis, 86% of the $3.8 trillion that we spent in healthcare last year, which is mostly sick care, are for treating chronic diseases that can often be prevented or reversed. And that could free up a huge amount of resources to make better care available for more people at lower costs. And to show how the cost savings can be so dramatic, we did 2 demonstration projects. The first one, it turns out that 5% of the population accounts for up to 80% of all healthcare costs. And those are the ones who have chronic diseases, heart disease being number 1 among them. So we did a study with Mutual Omaha. Dr. Leaf, my mentor at Harvard, who was the chief of medicine there and then became the first chairman of preventive medicine at Harvard, chaired our data coordinating center. And we had 4 academic centers at Harvard, Beth Israel, New York, UCSF and Scripps, and 4 community hospitals in Omaha, Des Moines, South Carolina, and Florida. And we found that most people who would have had a bypass or stent were offered my reversing heart disease program as a direct alternative. And most people, almost 80%, were able to avoid it. And so Mutual of Omaha found they saved almost $30,000 per patient in the first year. And it's important to show cost savings in the first year because the insurance companies know that a third of people change jobs and often change insurance companies every year. And they say, why should we spend our money for some future benefit that someone else is getting? But when we show them the first year, that really gets their attention. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is in West Virginia, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania, was covering my reversing heart disease program in 26 sites. But then they had such good outcomes, they decided to provide the program. And they found that when they tracked the costs compared to a control group matched for age, gender, and disease severity, the costs were essentially the same at the beginning. But after just 9 weeks, they were cut in half. And even though the program was only 9 weeks long, those cost savings persisted for more than 3 years. And it gets even better when they looked at the subgroup of people that they'd spent at least $25,000 on in the previous year. They reduced their costs by 4-fold in the year that followed by reducing hospitalizations, length of stay, procedures, ER visits, and so on, medication requirements. And it was important to change reimbursement because, I thought if we just did good research, that'll change medical practice. And it did have some effect, but not as much as I'd hoped. And I thought, well, if we could change reimbursement, we doctors do what we get paid. When we get trained to do, we get paid to do. So if we change reimbursement, we can change medical practice and even medical education. And I didn't realize it would take 16 years, but and that we had the support of Bill Clinton when he was president, Newt Gingrich when he was Speaker of the House, the most liberal Democrats, the most conservative Republicans. Still took 16 years, but they did, and I'm really grateful. And they created a new benefit category called intensive cardiac rehabilitation to cover my reversing heart disease program. This was the decision memo. And just last year, they began to cover it for when we offered virtually. So those of you in Los Angeles, we've trained, UCLA has my reversing heart disease program, the bricks and mortar world. But if you don't live near one of the hospitals or sites we've trained, it's, you don't get to do it. So now, because of COVID, if anything good came out of COVID, it was learning we could do it as well by Zoom as when we do it in person. So now Medicare will pay for it anywhere in the country. So you can live in a rural area, you can live in a food desert, you don't have to live within driving distance of a hospital or clinic. It's equally effective, equally safe, and you can do it in the comfort of your own home. If you're interested in learning more about it, go to ornish.com, our website, and there's information there. It's a team approach. It's a doctor, a nurse, a meditation teacher, exercise physiologist, and psychologist, and they all work together as a team. It's a 72-hour program instead of a 15-minute office visit. Medicare and most of the major insurance companies are covering this in the bricks and mortar world. And Aetna is also covering it, and Blue Shield of California in the virtual world, if you have those. And it's 4 hours twice a week for 9 weeks. And in each session, you get an hour of exercise, an hour of meditation and yoga-based stress management, an hour of support group, and an hour of a group meeting with a lecture. I've been meeting with Prince Charles, and he convened now King Charles, it's hard to remember that, and he convened the ministers of health of the National Health Service at his home in Highgrove a few years ago, right before COVID hit. To see whether the NHS might be interested in covering this the way that Medicare is, and said, gosh, if you could do this virtually, we'd be a lot more interested since you're in the US. And then we met with them again in June and said, we are now doing it virtually. So we're in discussions with them to see maybe the NHS will cover this as well. And he made this minute-long video I'm just going to play for you, which I thought was really nice.
I must say, I was fascinated to meet once again with Professor Dean Ornish and his wife Anne earlier this year at my home at Highgrove. They are remarkable leaders in lifestyle medicine and have demonstrated that simple lifestyle changes, improving diet and exercise, reducing stress and building relationships, can not only prevent but even reverse the progression of many chronic diseases.
Again, if it's reimbursable, it's sustainable. If it's pleasurable, it's sustainable. And if it's meaningful, it's sustainable. And so one of the questions we always ask patients is like, why do you want to do this? Well, I want to live longer. They usually say, well, why do you want to live longer? And they say, gosh, no one's ever asked me that before. I don't know. Let me think about that. I want to, dance at my daughter's wedding. I want to, write a book. I want to, watch my kids grow up, whatever it happens to be. If you can tap into what's meaningful for someone, then they're much more likely to make these lifestyle changes and to stay with it. And I've learned that joy is a much more powerful motivator than fear. For a month after someone's had a heart attack, they'll do pretty much anything the doctor or nurse says, but only for about a month or two, and then they stop doing it. And the reason is that we all know we're going to die. The mortality rate is still 100%. It's one per person, but we don't think about it most of the time because it's too scary. Unless we've had an event like a heart attack or something, then we think about it a lot. But even then, the denial comes back fairly quickly. I used to get in long discussions with Al Gore about this, that if you try to scare people about global warming, it'll galvanize them for a little while, but it's hard to sustain that. Telling people the Earth is going to immolate in 10 years is just too frightening. People just tune it out. But when you make these changes in your lifestyle, these biological mechanisms are so dynamic, you feel so much better so quickly. Like that guy in the video. Here's a guy who was told he needed a new heart. Like, what could be more radical than that, right? That costs $1 million, first of all, and a lifetime of immunosuppressive drugs. But he can only walk a few steps without getting chest pain. He had to be carried upstairs to his room. Couldn't make love with his spouse or play with his kids or go back to work as a doctor. And within a couple months, he was able to do all those things. Then the equation changes from preventing something bad from happening years down the road to, oh, I feel so much better. These are choices worth making, not to live longer, but to live better. It's why, the adherence to statin drugs like Lipitor, only about a third of people are taking them just 4 to 6 months after they're prescribed. And that's just taking a pill once a day. And usually someone else is paying for it. And most people don't have any side effects. And they're a proven benefit in people with heart disease. And yet we're getting 93% of the people who start our program finish all 72 hours. Again, because what you gain is so much more than what you give up, and quickly, then it reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying to joy of living. Again, what you gain is so much more than what you give up. And the other reason is that the support groups play a really important role. That's why AA works as well as it does. That the real epidemic isn't just heart disease or diabetes or cancer, it's loneliness and depression and isolation. That's really the pandemic. Study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And yet anything that brings us together, intimacy, is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit to yoke, to unite, union. These are really old ideas that we're rediscovering. And I was suicidally depressed when I was in college. I started out at Rice University in Houston, and I learned I could take all the meaning out of everything. I thought I was stupid, that the admissions committee had just made a big mistake by letting me in. And now that I was a bunch of really smart kids, it was just a matter of time before they realized what a big mistake they made in letting me in. But worse than that is I could take all the meaning out. Who cares? So what? Big deal. Nothing matters. Why bother? And I was all ready to do myself in, and probably would have. But I had such a terrible case of infectious mono from having run my body down so much. I literally couldn't get out of bed. And at that point, my parents got wind that I was doing a mess. I was a mess and not doing well, and took me home to Dallas to recover. And from my standpoint, to get strong enough to kill myself. And my older sister had been studying meditation, and there was an ecumenical teacher named Swami Satchidananda that really helped her out a lot. So my parents decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami when he came to Dallas, when he was giving a lecture there. There's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that was certainly true for me. And I learned that just as I could take all the meaning out of life, I could imbue my life with meaning by doing acts of service, which is what I love doing. This is why we're having this conversation today. It helps me out to be useful. And I learned that when I could practice these, went on a plant-based diet, even though I've been eating a Texas carnivorous diet for many years, and began meditating and so on, I began to get glimpses of what it meant to feel peaceful. And it really turned my whole life around. And as I've learned that the deepest roots of suffering and healing, in my limited experience of these, come from transforming isolation into intimacy. And one of the more interesting studies about this was done by David Spiegel at Stanford, where he took women with metastatic breast cancer who were getting all the same conventional treatments, chemo, radiation, surgery. But in addition, he divided them into 2 groups. And one group also had a support group once a week for a year for 90 minutes. And their support groups are like the ones that we do. They're not just helping people stay on the diet. It's creating a safe place for people to let down their emotional defenses and to talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives without fear that someone's going to judge them or criticize them or abandon them or reject them. And look what he found. The program was 1 year long, but 5 years later, he told me he almost fell off his chair. The women who had the support group lived over twice as long as the women who didn't. Now, a skeptic might say, oh, please give me a break. Talking about my feelings can help me live longer if I've got breast cancer, please. But they do, and people used to say, oh, you live in Marin County, it's an altered state, they'll do anything there. This is such a touchy-feely program. And I'd get really defensive and say, hey, no, this is hard science. Look at our quantitative arteriograms and our cardiac positron emission tomography scans and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, you know what? It is a touchy-feely program. That's why it works as well as it does, because that's where the healing occurs. We are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. Anything that brings us together is healing. Anything that creates a sense of trust enables us to open up our hearts and to be connected and be intimate, which in turn can create healing. On the other hand, one study of Twitter, which is in the news lately, having Elon Musk just bought it, that in almost 150 million tweets, language patterns reflecting negative social relationships, disengagement, and negative emotions, especially anger, which, by the way, is the one emotion that's been consistently linked with heart disease and a lot of other illnesses, predicted coronary heart disease mortality better than even smoking or diabetes or hypertension or obesity. So those things that isolate us really create illness. And, when Nelson Mandela was doing his long walk to freedom after being in prison for 16 years, he said, do you hate your jailers? And he said, well, they took away the best years of my life, but if I hate them, then I'm still in prison in my heart. Because when you put out that kind of anger, that hatred, it affects you. So the most selfish thing you can do is to have that kind of double vision, that on one level, we're all separate, you're you and I'm me. But from a non-dual perspective, which ultimately meditation or prayer or psychedelics or lots of ways can take you to, gives you that unity consciousness that on one level, we're already interconnected. And that can really be a very powerful healing experience as well. And it's why when Aldous Huxley wrote The Perennial Philosophy, he said, what is it that all these spiritual and religious traditions have in common once you get past the rituals that people fight and kill each other over, my religion is right, no, my religion is right, is altruism, forgiveness, compassion, and love. Because again, that's what frees us from our suffering. As Nelson Mandela said, it doesn't excuse or condone what the other person did. It frees us from the suffering that goes along with that. And so that's a part of our program as well. What I call the conspiracy of love, and helping people use the experience of suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives in ways that go beyond just unclogging their arteries or getting their blood pressure down or whatever. These are things that can really help us rediscover inner sources of peace and joy and well-being, and then go out in the world and often accomplish even more without getting sick or stressed in the process. So let me stop here. I promise we'd allow at least 10 minutes for Q&A. I think we've got about 11 or 12. Any comments or questions you have, I would welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ornish, for your presentation. We do have a number of questions on the chat window. I'd like to go under them. I'm not sure if we'll have a chance to answer all of them, so apologies if I may skip a couple of them.
Sure.
Marina asks, under the list of diseases, she noticed that dementia or Alzheimer's is not mentioned. She asks what, if anything, you think that can be done in terms of lifestyle changes that can improve this type of disease?
Well, I didn't put it on the list of conditions because we're still doing research to see if it's true or not. We hope that it is, and we'll know fairly soon. But there have been studies showing that the finger study that Dr. Miyakiva Pelto of the Karolinska Institute did had a less intensive but multi-domain intervention like what we're doing. She's, by the way, collaborating with me on the current study we're doing. Found that less intensive lifestyle changes help to slow the rate of progression into dementia. We're hoping the more intensive ones might stop or reverse it. And the reason that's important is that, well, there are a lot of reasons that's important. My mom died of Alzheimer's and all of her siblings, and I have one of the APOE4 genes, so I have a personal interest in this. But beyond that, it's expected it's going to be $1 trillion in costs for Alzheimer's, just in the US alone before long. And there are a number of new diagnostic technologies where you can diagnose that someone's likely to get Alzheimer's 10 or 20 years even before it becomes clinically apparent. A lot of people say, why would I want to know if I'm going to get something that's so horrible that I can't do anything about? So I think that knowing that we can help prevent it already and maybe even stop or reverse it through more intensive interventions would really give a lot of people new hope and new choices.
Okay, that's a very good point.
And like I say, if my approach to fundraising is, if this is the kind of thing that you would find meaningful to help us to finish our study, we've got about a year left on it, please let me know. You can, my email is dean.ornish@pmri.org, dean.ornish, or just dean@pmri.org will get to me.
Thank you. We have a question from Alan Schumann. What is the role of omega-3 fatty acids in addition to primary plant-based diets?
Well, Alexander Leaf, who was my mentor at Harvard, he was the chief of medicine and the first chair of preventive medicine, and also the chief of the medical service at the Mass General, did a lot of the pioneering work on fish oil. So I've been recommending fish oil since the early 80s when I was an intern there. There's some question now about, whether they're as beneficial for heart disease as people had once thought. They're still beneficial. They may not be as beneficial, but they're clearly beneficial for cognition in helping to improve cognition or help to prevent the deterioration of that. So I think they're worth getting. And there are no clean fish. All fish are contaminated with mercury, dioxin, PCBs, and so on. But you can buy fish oils. I don't make supplements or have any relationships with any of the companies, but Nordic Naturals makes a version of fish oil that has all the bad stuff removed. So if you're not, you can also get algae-based fish oil, which I take. That's where the fish get it. They don't make the fish oil, the omega-3s. They get it from eating the algae. So if you can go straight to the source, even better, and then you don't have to worry so much about the contaminants.
Okay. There's a question about something called mimetics. I'm not sure if you mentioned them in your talk, but mimetics seem to be something that replaces, that tries to burn calories or replaces food in some sense. The question is whether there are mimetics that can enhance rather than to replace beneficial lifestyle changes.
No, I think lifestyle changes really are so powerful. It's always interesting to me that people are, I mean, to put your question in a larger context, it's like, why are you doing this radical intervention? Why don't you do something more conservative, like a heart transplant, or bypass surgery? Ironically, the studies have shown that there are now 8 randomized trials of stents and angioplasties, and in stable patients, all 8 of them show that they don't prolong life, prevent heart attacks, or in most cases even reduce angina. And the same is true for bypass surgery. There's a very small group of people with unstable conditions or who have the worst disease, left main disease and poor left ventricular function, that may be some benefit. But we spend $100 billion a year on these procedures that are dangerous, invasive, expensive, and ineffective. And yet the lifestyle changes, the only side effects are good ones, as opposed to bleeding in your brain, for example. So I tend to focus on those.
Okay. We have a question from Vanessa. What do you think are the top things each of us can do to change the healthcare system and get lifestyle medicine to really proliferate so that we can spend less on sick care?
Well, that's what I'm doing. I try to find leverage points. One was to get Medicare to cover this. I figured if Medicare covered this, then it would change medical practice and even medical education, which in some ways has been happening. I was at this White House conference. I've been an advisor to 3 presidents. I worked with the Department of Agriculture to try to improve the school lunch program. I'm just always looking for. I took a lot of flack for this, but I chaired the health advisory boards at PepsiCo and got them to make healthier versions of junk food. Even incremental change on that scale can be helpful. With McDonald's, I got them to put salads on the menu. But one of the things I learned was that the salads were $5.95, but because of the perverse incentives, the beef was subsidized, and the burger was 99 cents. So if you're on a fixed income, you don't have a lot of money, it actually costs less to eat junk food than it does to eat healthy food. So I'm always looking for these leverage points.
Right. Their whole model is based around eating the burger, not the salad. So it's hard to change it. We have a question from John about, he says, many of my patients have a hard time knowing what information they find online or through friends about health and wellness, which of that information is true and useful, and what is quote unquote scam. How do you advise to find what is the truth about health and wellness?
Yeah, well, that's why I spent most of my adult life doing these research studies. These studies are really hard to do. They're hard to get funded. They're hard to do. They're hard to get, everything about them is hard. But they're meaningful because, again, the whole point of science is to sort out what's true and what isn't, for whom and under what circumstances. Now, as Dennis Burkitt, who discovered Burkitt's lymphoma, once famously said, not everything that counts can be counted. Not everything that's meaningful is measurable, but a lot of things are. And, if we can, as I mentioned earlier, if we can do good science and show something that's never been shown before, and we publish it in the leading peer-reviewed journals, that's the whole point of science in these journals, is to try to sort out the stuff that's not true from the stuff that is. And nowhere is this more badly needed than in nutrition, because everybody's got a diet or this or that, and they make all these crazy claims, and people don't know any better, and they believe them. And telling people what they want to hear is a great way to sell books. I always joke that my next book is going to be, if you eat it off of someone else's plate, they get all the calories. I think it'll be an instant bestseller. I don't know if it'll get in any of the journals though.
But not, we already now know some things about what really works and what is not really true. How do you advise for people to find out about what's there? Is there, for example, some website where you can check if a particular fad or diet or something is there's not up to it, something? Yeah.
Well, in my books, for example, I've written 7 books. They've all been bestsellers. The most recent, called Undo It, they all have references, hundreds of references at the end. At the end of the book that are associated with each chapter. Every claim I make in there is supported by a peer-reviewed study. And so, that's why I write books, is to try to make it easy for people to find out what's true and not have to. If you read another book, say, did this person do science? Is it based on their science or someone else's science, or is it just stuff that they've made up? I debated Dr. Atkins a number of times before he died, because he made all these claims that people love to hear, that pork rinds and bacon and sausage are really health foods, and they're not, So that's really, again, go to the sources.
Right. We have another question, Dr. Ornish. There is more healthcare provider burnout and depression that I have seen in my entire career. Can lifestyle medicine help address this pandemic?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I was suicidally depressed when I was in college. That was my doorway into this. So I'm very tune into that. And the worst thing about being depressed is it feels like things are bad. It feels like you're seeing things clearly for the first time, that things are really bad. They'll always be bad. They've always been bad. And anytime you thought differently, you were just fooling yourself. And a lot of healthcare practitioners feel that way now, because if you have to see a new patient every 8 to 10 minutes, you don't have time to talk about, what's going on in their lives and their diet and their lifestyle and so on. You basically have time to listen to the heart and lungs, write a note in the progress note of the electronic medical record, write a prescription, and then they're on the way. It's really profoundly unsatisfying for doctors and for patients. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people are seeking out alternative medicine practitioners, some of whom are really good and some of whom are not, but just because they spend time with you, they talk to you, they touch you, they listen to what you're saying. And so I think it's a crisis now. A lot of people are leaving medicine because of that. That's why it was really important to me to spend all this time with Medicare. Now we can spend 72 hours with people, and the doctor is only overseeing it. He or she isn't doing most of that time. They're really acting more as the quarterback, so they can leverage their time. And it's profoundly satisfying. That's why lifestyle medicine is the fastest growing field in medicine today, because it's so meaningful to be able to have time and to empower your patients with information that can really help transform their lives and transform our lives too. If all we are algorithms, we're going to get replaced by an iPhone app. Computers do algorithms and AI better than we do. But we can really not only have the science of medicine, but also the art of medicine. That medicine can be a spiritual practice as well as a scientific one. And that, for me, brings great meaning to my life, and I know for many others as well.
Right.
And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about lifestyle medicine, go to the American College of Lifestyle Medicine website. You can Google it.
I would like to wrap up with one question of my own. You addressed this a little bit in your talk, but it seems like there's a trap where there is not a lot of incentive for these studies to run. Like it usually, if a pharmaceutical company runs a very expensive study and then they make tons of money because they sell that medicine. But if you want to understand it better, so sleeping more, where's that money going to come from? So how do we break the cycle? How do we get the NIH to do more studies, or where does that money come from? How do you suggest to get around
Well,
this?
it's true. The NIH mainly does incremental studies. It's 250 milligrams of this dose better than 500 milligrams, that kind of thing. If it's truly disruptive, they generally don't fund it because they think, oh, it's a waste of money. No one can do it. And without the funding, you can't show it works. And they don't think it's going to work. They don't fund it, like I mentioned earlier. So yeah, that would be a really good place to begin, having like a MacArthur fellowship where, they just give people money and say, what's most interesting to you, go and do that, or give people who have already done some research in this area to encourage them to do more disruptive work. I mean, the Alzheimer's drug that I mentioned that was just passed by the FDA just a few weeks ago, the New York Times said it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar drug, and all it does is slow down the rate we get worse by 20-something percent, and and that's it. Just so there are like I said, if we showed that drug X could do any of these things we've talked about today, it would be a multi-billion-dollar drug. But now as it is, it's just lifestyle. And people think, but now that Medicare is covering it, especially covering it virtually. I mean, to me, as I get older, I'm taking more a longer event horizon. Things are getting better. It's just taking a lot longer than I would have predicted. So let me just say that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. I hope at least some of this has been useful. If you're interested in learning more about our work, go to ornish.com. If you're interested in helping support it, just write me directly, Dean at PMRI for Preventive Medicine Research Institute.org. And again, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for the chance to be in your lives today. Take care.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for a great talk. And thank you everybody for joining. Apologies, some of you could only join a few minutes into the talk, but we were able to send you the link for you to be able to join. Thank you for joining again, and you guys have a great rest of your day.